The final mile to the ranger station was a war against the forest. My truck's headlights cut a nervous tunnel through a suffocating darkness, with ancient pines pressing in so close on the gravel road I could hear their needles scraping against my side mirrors. It felt less like a road and more like a temporary truce with the wilderness, one that could be revoked at any moment. When the station finally appeared, it was just a lone, flickering porch light in an ocean of black, a tiny raft of order adrift in a vast, encroaching chaos. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence was absolute. Out here, you don't just hear the quiet, you feel it, a physical pressure against your eardrums. A mix of professional confidence and first-night jitters churned in my stomach. I'd handled remote posts before, from the Alaskan interior to the swampy depths of the Everglades. I was Leo Vance, a ranger's ranger. I knew how to read tracks, predict weather, and face down a grizzly. This was just another forest. The station door creaked open, spilling a rectangle of weary yellow light onto the porch steps. The man framed in the doorway looked like he was carved from petrified wood. He was my predecessor, Silas Thorne, the veteran I was here to relieve. "You're Vance," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was gravelly, dry as kindling. "Leo, good to finally meet you, Silas." I offered a hand. His handshake was like grasping a bundle of dry twigs, firm but with no life in it. He led me inside to a small, cluttered office that smelled of stale coffee and damp wool. The exhaustion I'd seen in the doorway wasn't just on him, it was in him, settled deep into the marrow of his bones. It was in the slump of his shoulders and the permanent, haunted parentheses etched around his mouth. He moved with the slow, deliberate care of a man who expects the floor to give way at any second. He poured me a cup of coffee from a perpetually simmering pot, his hand trembling slightly. The briefing was as curt as his welcome. He spread a topographical map across the desk, tracing the patrol route with a finger that looked more like a twisted root. "Standard loop," he rasped. "Check the access roads, make sure the fire tower comms are online, look for any illegal campers. Simple enough." He paused, his gaze lifting from the map to bore into me. His eyes were the most unsettling thing about him. They were bloodshot and exhausted, but behind the fatigue was a deep, active weariness, the kind you see in soldiers who have been on the front lines for too long. "But the job isn't the route, Leo," he said, his voice dropping. "It's the rules. You follow them to the letter. No exceptions, no debate. Are you listening?" I nodded, leaning forward, trying to project competence. "Shoot." He held up a single, bony finger. "1. You stay on the marked trails. Always. Don't go chasing a sound, don't take a shortcut. The forest rearranges things. The paths are the only truth out there." I managed to keep a straight face. A bit of local folklore to keep the new guy on his toes. Standard procedure. 2. He continued, a second finger joining the first. "You will see things that are wrong. I call it the wrongness. A deer with too many joints. A shadow that moves faster than the thing casting it. A tree that wasn't there 5 minutes ago. You are to note it in the log. Do not stop. Do not get out of your vehicle. Do not investigate. You see a glitch in the code of the world, you drive on by." My professional smile felt a little tight. He was starting to get elaborate with this hazing ritual. A not deer? It was creative, I'll give him that. 3. His voice became a low, urgent whisper. "This is the most important. You will encounter people. They will look distressed. They will ask for help. A lost child, a stranded hiker, a woman looking for her husband. You offer no aid. You do not engage. You do not follow. You give them nothing. Not water, not a map, not a goddamn word." This one pricked at my conscience. "Silas, with all due respect, my duty is to assist." "Your duty here is to survive," he snapped, his sudden intensity making me flinch. "That is not a person. It's a lure." He took a shaky breath, calming himself. "And finally, Rule 4, guard your name. Never, under any circumstances, do you give your real name to anyone or anything you meet in these woods. A name is a handle. It's a hook they can sink into you, an anchor to attach themselves to your reality. I nearly laughed. A hook? Like a fish. The whole performance was a masterpiece of backwoods intimidation. It was an old-timer's way of testing the new blood, of seeing if I was a gullible fool or a steady hand. I decided to play along, to show him I was the latter. "I understand," I said, my voice steady and reassuring. "Stay on the trails, ignore the weird stuff, don't talk to strangers, and keep my name to myself." "Got it. Don't worry, Silas, I can handle it." He just stared at me for a long moment, his weary eyes searching my face. He saw my confidence, my barely concealed skepticism. He saw a man who believed in the solid, predictable world of ranger handbooks and empirical evidence. A small, sad smile touched his lips, but it never reached his eyes. "You'll learn," was all he said, turning back to the map. As I climbed back into my truck, the keys feeling solid and real in my hand, I felt a surge of pride. I hadn't cracked. I'd passed the test. The old man could have his spooky stories and his boogeymen. I was a professional in a world governed by rules I understood. I checked my mirrors, put the truck in gear, and rolled out into the night, ready for whatever this forest could throw at me. I just didn't realize I had already left that world behind. The first hour of the patrol was exactly what I expected, profoundly, beautifully boring. The gravel crunched rhythmically under my tires, a steady, familiar sound. My world was the cone of my headlights, the green glow of the dashboard, and the vast, silent dark that pressed in from all sides. I sipped the bitter coffee Silas had given me, the skepticism warming me more than the drink itself. The forest rearranges things. A not deer. Guard your name. It was almost comical, in the clean, rational space of my truck. I was a federal employee on a designated route. The world operated on physics, not fairy tales. I was checking the turnoff for what the map called Hatcher's Road, a dead-end logging trail that hadn't been used in a decade, when I saw her. She was standing just at the edge of my headlights, one arm raised in a gesture that was both a wave and a plea. She looked utterly out of place, a fragile piece of civilization dropped into the wild. My foot eased onto the brake, my training kicking in instantly. Stranded motorist? Lost hiker? My mind cycled through the possibilities, the protocols I'd drilled for years. Silas's strange warnings flickered at the edge of my thoughts, but they felt abstract, ridiculous, when faced with the reality of a person in need. I rolled the truck to a stop and lowered the passenger side window. "Ma'am, you all right?" "Oh, thank goodness," she said, her voice a pitch-perfect symphony of relief. She hurried closer, her movements possessing a strange, gliding quality. It was as if she weren't walking on the uneven, root-laced ground, but floating just above it. There was no stumble, no hesitation, just a fluid, seamless motion that was the first thing to set my teeth on edge. "I'm so sorry to trouble you," she said, her hands clasped at her chest. "My husband, he has gone missing from me. We were meant to have a stay at Crystal Lake, but he went for a walk hours ago, and he has not returned." I frowned. "Crystal Lake?" "Ma'am, there's no Crystal Lake anywhere in this park. I have the maps right here." She blinked, a slow, deliberate sweep of her eyelids, like the shutters on an old camera. "Oh, are you certain?" He was so very sure of it. Her phrasing was just off. Polished and polite, but stiff, as if translated from another language by a program that was 99% accurate. That 1% was a chasm. My gaze dropped. She was wearing a simple summer dress, horribly inadequate for the chilly night air. She was also missing a shoe. A single, white athletic sock covered her left foot. But as she stood there on the damp, debris-strewn shoulder of the road, the sock remained impossibly, spotlessly white. Not a speck of dirt, not a single leaf clinging to it. Rule number 3 echoed in my head, a sudden, cold whisper from Silas: offer no aid. If anyone approaches you for help, do not engage. But I was looking at a woman, a confused, cold, and frightened woman. My instinct, my very purpose as a ranger, screamed at me to help, This was a human being, not one of Silas's boogeymen. His paranoia was a luxury I couldn't afford when someone was in actual, tangible distress. "Look," I said, my voice firm with practiced authority. "There's no lake, but he's probably just turned around. The best thing you can do is stay with your car, and I'll put a call in. Where did you park?" She gestured vaguely into the impenetrable wall of trees behind her. "He took our vehicle to find a better spot." I was waiting. The story was unraveling. No car, no lake, no sense. The wrongness Silas had described wasn't a creature with impossible joints. It was this: 100 tiny, sharp inconsistencies that pricked at the surface of reality. Her distress felt like a performance, a flawless recitation of lines she didn't quite understand. Rule number 4 arrived, hot on the heels of the last one: guard your name. "I can't thank you enough for stopping," she said, her face breaking into a radiant smile. "You've been so kind. What should I call you so I can tell my husband who saved me?" The question hung in the air, a baited hook shimmering in the dark. I could have given her my rank. I could have said nothing. I could have driven away. But a part of me, the proud, rational part, needed to defy the superstition. It felt like a final test of my own sanity. Giving my name was an act of rebellion against the encroaching madness of the old man's rules. It was a way of planting my flag, of declaring that the real world still had dominion here. I leaned forward, making my voice as clear and steady as possible. "I'm Leo." Her smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. Those eyes, dark and predatory, held my gaze. The expression was one of profound, triumphant satisfaction. A shiver, cold and sharp, traced a path down my spine. "Thank you, Leo," she said, and the way she caressed my name was a physical thing, a cold touch against my skin. The emphasis was a confirmation, a seal being pressed into wax. Then, without another word, she turned. She didn't walk back into the woods, she flowed into them. With that same unnatural, gliding grace, she receded into the darkness between the trees, the shadows swallowing her whole until she was simply gone. I sat there for a full minute, the engine idling, the only sound in a world that had suddenly become far too quiet. The clean, crisp air now felt heavy, charged with a dreadful new significance. I had been weighed, I had been measured, and I had been found wanting. And in the silent, waiting woods, something now had my name. I jammed the truck into drive, my tires spitting gravel as I peeled away from Hatcher's Road. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. My rational mind was scrambling, desperately trying to build a cage of logic around what had just happened. She was a drifter, a cultist, someone on drugs. Any explanation would do, as long as it was human and bound by the laws of cause and effect. But the impossibly clean sock and that chilling predatory smile, they wouldn't fit into any box I tried to build. The oppressive silence I'd felt earlier returned, but now it was different. It wasn't empty. It was full. It was the held breath before a scream. The familiar night sounds of the forest, the chirp of crickets, the rustle of small animals, the distant call of an owl, were gone, utterly and completely erased. The world outside my windows was a vacuum, and the pressure of it was making my ears ache. I needed to break it. I needed a human voice, a dose of reality. I snatched the radio handset from its cradle, the plastic cool and solid in my sweating palm. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Vance. Radio check. Over." The speaker crackled, but not with the familiar hiss of empty airwaves. It was a thick, wet static, like bacon frying in a flooded pan. I tried again. "Silas, this is Vance. Come in, over." The static pulsed, and through it something leaked out. It was music, a warped and stretched snippet of a forgettable indie rock song, the very one I'd been listening to on the long drive up here. It sounded like it was being played on a dying music box, the notes sour and bent. It was a piece of my own recent past, twisted into a mocking echo. I dropped the handset as if it were burning hot. The forest shouldn't know that song. It couldn't. Then, A new sound bled through the dying notes, a whisper layered beneath the static. It was faint, desperate, and terrifyingly familiar. "Help me!" It was my own voice. "Leo, help!" The whisper repeated, glitching and breaking apart. My own voice, calling my own name for help from the heart of the static. A cold dread, heavier and more profound than simple fear, settled into my gut. This wasn't just a strange encounter anymore. This was personal. I needed to keep moving, to get back to the station, back to the flimsy security of its four walls. My foot pressed harder on the accelerator. My headlights swept across the trail ahead, and then I saw it. Sitting dead center on the trail, perfectly illuminated, was a single athletic shoe, the mate to the impossibly clean sock. It wasn't tossed aside or lost. It was placed, positioned upright as if on display in a store window. A piece of bait. A deliberate, taunting message. Do not stop, do not investigate, Silas's second rule. But I was no longer skeptical. I was terrified, and terror was quickly curdling into a hot, defiant anger. I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a halt just feet from the shoe. I had to see. I had to know. I threw the door open, ignoring the screaming instinct to stay inside my bubble of glass and steel. The air that hit me was cold and smelled of damp earth and something else, something like ozone and decay. As I walked toward the shoe, my boots crunching on the gravel, I saw a small, neat pile of debris just beside it. It wasn't a random scattering of leaves. It looked arranged. I knelt, the beam of my flashlight trembling. It was a small collection of brittle leaves, snapped twigs, and shreds of dark green moss, and nestled right on top was a single, perfectly white feather. The truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't evidence left by the woman. This was what she had been made of. She was a puppet assembled from the forest floor, a construct of leaves and lies. When she'd melted into the trees, it was a homecoming. The impossibly clean sock, the pristine feather, they were the parts of the illusion that hadn't been rendered from the dirt and grime of the real world. She was a stage prop, and after her performance, she had been dismantled, leaving behind a single piece of her costume as a souvenir. I scrambled back to the truck, slamming and locking the door, my fortress. But the walls were already breached. As I drove, a sudden storm of moths battered my windshield. They weren't fluttering. They were dive-bombing the glass with a dry, papery ticking. And in the frantic, brief illuminations of their wings, I saw the patterns on them weren't spots or stripes. They were eyes. Hundreds of tiny, unblinking human eyes, all staring in at me. I swiped at the wipers, smearing them across the glass. I kept my gaze locked on the narrow path ahead, but out of the corner of my eye, the forest itself was changing. In the sweeping beam of my headlights, the smooth, pale bark on the sycamores seemed to twist and bulge for a split second, forming the silent, screaming faces of a tormented chorus. The world outside my truck was becoming corrupted, its code being actively rewritten into a nightmare, and I had just given it the key. I had given it my name. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, my breath coming in ragged, shallow bursts. The world beyond my windshield was no longer a forest. It was a canvas for my terror. I saw movement in the corner of my eye and flinched, but it was just a low-hanging branch. I heard a whisper and my head snapped around, but it was just the hiss of the air vents. The line between what was real and what my fear was projecting had frayed into nothing. My only mission was to drive. To follow the twisting gravel path back to the station, back to Silas, back to some semblance of sanity. The truck rounded a long, gentle curve, its headlights sweeping across a small clearing, and there, standing in the center of the road, was a deer. For a single blessed second it looked normal, a doe, frozen in the sudden glare, poised and still. My foot instinctively moved to the brake, the ingrained habit of 1,000 night patrols taking over. Then it moved. It wasn't a step, it was a glitch. The creature flickered, vanishing from its spot and reappearing 5 feet to the left in a jerky, stop-motion stutter. There was no transition, no blur of movement, just a sequence of horrifyingly distinct still images. It was as if it couldn't exist in the space between 2 points, only at the points themselves. It was lagging in and out of existence, a broken animation in the code of the world. Rule number 2 roared in my mind. If you see something that breaks the laws of nature, note it, but do not stop. But I was stopped. My truck was idling, its engine a soft rumble against the profound, unholy silence emanating from the thing on the road. I couldn't look away. My horror was a physical chain, locking my eyes onto the violation standing before me. Its legs were bent at nauseatingly wrong angles, joints where no joints should be, allowing it to stand in a crouch that would have shattered the bones of any living creature. Its neck was too long, its head too small, its proportions a subtle, nauseating parody of the animal it was pretending to be. This was Silas's, not deer. My headlights should have caught its eyes, should have reflected back as 2 bright points of green or gold. They didn't. Instead, the creature's eyes were 2 pinpricks of absolute, bottomless black. They didn't reflect the light, they consumed it. They were perfect little voids, holes punched through the fabric of the night that seemed to pull the light from the air around them, making the space around its head even darker. There was no soul behind those eyes. There was no anything. There was only absence. It turned its head toward me. The motion was fluid this time, a slow, deliberate swivel that was somehow more terrifying than its glitching. It was a gesture of acknowledgement. It saw me. It knew I was here. Then, its face began to split open. The jaw did not hinge downward like an animal's. It opened vertically, like a seam being unstitched, before blossoming outward into a circular, gaping maw. The inside was not flesh and tongue, but a spiraling vortex of countless needle-thin teeth, arranged in concentric rings that spun slowly in opposite directions. From that impossible mouth came an impossible sound. It was the high, terrified scream of a woman. It was a perfect mimicry, a sound of pure, mortal panic that was so real it made the hairs on my arms stand on end. For a heart-stopping second I thought of Ilara, of a victim somewhere in the woods. But then the sound began to corrupt. It stretched and warped, the pitch wavering as if being played on a warped record. The scream pixelated, shattering into a cascade of sharp, digital artifacts, before finally collapsing into the same wet, frying static I'd heard on the radio. It was the sound of a breaking file, of a reality failing to load. That was it. That was the final push. My foot stomped on the accelerator, no thought, only a primal command to flee. The truck lurched forward, barreling straight toward the creature. I braced for an impact that never came. In the instant before I would have hit it, the not deer simply flickered out of the way, re-rendering itself on the shoulder of the road, unscathed. I didn't slow down. I roared past it, my eyes locked forward. But I could feel its stare. In my side mirror I caught a final glimpse. Its body remained perfectly still, but its head had swiveled, rotating a full 180 degrees on that too long neck to keep its light-devouring eyes fixed on my retreating truck. It didn't pursue, it just watched. It was the calm, confident gaze of an observer that had just confirmed a vital piece of data. The experiment was proceeding as planned. The trap had been baited, the lure had been taken, and the mark was now confirmed. I was no longer just lost. I was being tracked, catalogued, and processed. And the real threat hadn't even shown itself yet. The image of the not deer's swiveling head was burned onto the backs of my eyelids. I was driving on pure, animal instinct. My foot welded to the floor. The truck bucked and slid on the loose gravel, the suspension groaning as I pushed it far beyond its limits. Every rustle of leaves was the sound of pursuit, every shadow a lurking horror. The forest wasn't just a place anymore, it was a conscious entity, and I could feel its cold, ancient attention fixed squarely on me. My only hope was the radio. The map showed a high point, a bald ridge about a mile ahead. If I could get there, Maybe I could break through the suffocating static and reach Silas, reach the world where things made sense. The climb to the ridge was a brutal, teeth-rattling ascent. The road narrowed, becoming a treacherous shelf cut into the hillside. Twice a tire slipped on the loose scree at the edge, and the truck fishtailed, threatening to send me plunging into the black abyss below. The auditory hallucinations were getting worse. I heard my mother humming a lullaby, the sound of a woman weeping, the sharp crack of a branch that wasn't there. My panic was the fuel, and the forest was burning it, using the smoke to paint nightmares in the air. Finally, I burst through the tree line onto the exposed rock of the ridge. The wind howled up here, a raw, clean sound that momentarily scrubbed the whispers from my ears. I slammed the truck into park and grabbed the handset, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped it. "Silas! Silas, come in, damn it! This is Vance, do you read me?" My voice was a ragged croak. The speaker answered with that same thick, corrupting static. My heart sank. "Leo, help!" my own voice whispered from the speaker again. "No!" I shouted, banging the handset against the dashboard. "Silas, answer me!" Then, a miracle. Through the garbage noise came a dry, rattling pop, followed by the faint hiss of an open channel. "Ants, Leo, is that you? Your signal is breaking up. What's your status?" Relief washed over me in a wave so powerful it left me weak. It was Silas, a real human voice. "Silas, thank God, something's wrong out here. Terribly wrong." I spilled the story out in a panicked, disjointed torrent. The woman on the road, the non-existent lake, the impossibly clean sock. I told him about the radio playing my music, the shoe on the trail, the pile of leaves and the feather. My voice cracked as I described the not deer, the glitching movements, the light-eating eyes, the scream that shattered into static. I sounded like a madman, and I knew it. There was a long pause on the other end. When Silas finally spoke, all the weariness was gone from his voice. It had been replaced by something else, something sharp and cold with dread. "Leo, the woman, did you talk to her?" "Yes. I tried to help her. Did you give her anything?" he cut in, his voice dangerously quiet. "No, nothing. I stopped." The memory of her predatory smile filled my mind. The way she'd said my name. A cold pit opened in my stomach. "Oh, God," I whispered into the handset. She asked my name, Silas. I told her my name. The silence that followed was the most terrifying thing I had experienced all night. It stretched for 5 seconds, then 10. It was a silence filled with judgment and a terrible final understanding. When Silas spoke again, his voice was flat and dead, like the voice of a man pronouncing a sentence. "You broke rule number 4. It was just a name, Silas. It's just superstition." "No," he said, and the word was as heavy as a tombstone. "It's a mechanism. That wasn't a woman, Leo. It was a construct, a mimic. You've heard of anglerfish? It's a lure made of sticks and whispers to draw you in. By giving it your name, you gave it a direct, personal hook into you. You've been marked for collection." My blood ran cold. "Collection?" "The things you're seeing, the moths, the faces, the whispers on the radio, that's not just the forest anymore. That's your fear. You gave it a key, and now it's using your own panic to rewrite the world around you. It's feeding on it." "And the deer?" I choked out. "What was that thing?" "An observer," Silas said grimly. "A scout. It was sent to confirm the mark, to make sure the hook was set. Now that it's seen you, it's reported back. The real threat is on its way." The handset felt slick in my palm. My breath hitched. The wind on the ridge no longer felt clean. It felt like the gasping of a predator. "Your patrol is over, Leo," Silas commanded, his voice now a blade of pure urgency. "That is a direct order. Your new mission is survival. Forget the route, forget the log. You drive back to the station. You drive back here now. Do you understand me?" "I understand," I whispered, the words barely audible. "Get moving," he ordered. "It's not just a hunt anymore, Leo. It's a harvest, and you're the crop." The drive back was a descent into madness. I was a fugitive fleeing a prison whose walls were made of trees and shadow, Silas's words, It's a harvest, and you're the crop," echoed in my mind, a frantic counterpoint to the thudding of my own heart. The station's porch light was the only fixed point in my unraveling universe, a distant star I navigated toward with desperate, single-minded focus. When I finally skidded to a halt in the clearing, sending a spray of gravel across the dirt, a wave of relief so profound it was sickening washed over me. I was back. I was safe. But the light wasn't shining on an empty porch. She was waiting for me, Alara. She stood on the top step, hands clasped demurely in front of her, a grotesque parody of a welcoming party. This time, the illusion was failing, the performance horribly degraded. Her movements were no longer smooth but jerky and disjointed, like a marionette whose strings were hopelessly tangled. Her head was cocked at a slightly unnatural angle, and when she spoke, her voice was a discordant, off-key version of the one I'd heard before. "You took a long while, Leo," she said, her smile a twitching, unconvincing smear. "Did you find him? Did you find my husband at Crystal Lake?" The calm, rational part of me was gone, burned away by a night of abject terror. This thing, this construct of sticks and lies, was taunting me on the very threshold of my sanctuary. The last thread of my control snapped. With a snarl, I drew my sidearm, the familiar weight of it in my hand, a small, solid piece of the world I used to know. "Get away from me," I growled, my voice shaking with a potent cocktail of fear and rage. I expected it to vanish, to melt into the shadows as it had before. Instead, it did something far more unsettling. It gave a soft, final sigh, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement, and simply collapsed. It wasn't the fall of a human body. There was no soft thud of flesh or crack of bone. It deflated, imploding in on itself. One moment, it was the shape of a woman. The next, it was nothing but a heap of forest detritus, cascading down the steps. A pile of brittle twigs, dead leaves, and clumps of moss settled on the porch, exactly like the one I'd seen by the road. And there, sitting perfectly atop the pile, were her shoes. Both of them, side by side, neatly paired and pristine, as if they were a gift left on my doorstep. That was the final insult. It wasn't just a threat, it was a mockery. A trophy from its victory over my judgment. The sight of those perfectly placed shoes sent a surge of hot, blinding fury through me. It overwhelmed the fear, the caution, everything Silas had told me. I was being toyed with, ridiculed by a puppet made of garbage. "No," I whispered, the word a venomous hiss. I wouldn't cower inside. I wouldn't let it win. Ignoring the pile of debris, I stormed off the porch, my flashlight beam cutting a furious swath through the darkness. I was going to search the perimeter, find whatever was controlling this thing, and face it. It was a stupid, suicidal impulse born of pure rage, and I walked right into the trap. The moment my boots left the cleared ground of the station and touched the forest floor, the world tilted. The familiar trail leading back to the main road, the one I had just driven, seemed to twist and writhe before my eyes, turning into an unfamiliar labyrinth of forking paths. I charged down one, my anger giving me a false sense of courage. I saw a wooden trail marker nailed to a tree, its white lettering catching my light. I knew that sign. It was supposed to read, "Station, 1/4 mile." I shone my beam on it. The letters had rearranged themselves, gouged into the wood as if by a claw. It now read, "Slaughter." Panic began to claw its way back up, cold and sharp. I spun around, shining my light on another sign that should have pointed toward the fire tower. It now read, "Your fault." I started to run, blindly crashing through the undergrowth, the forest no longer a passive backdrop, but an active, malicious participant in my torment. And then I saw it. Through a break in the trees, a sight so beautiful, so yearned for, it made me sob with relief, the main highway. I could see the distant sweep of headlights, hear the low, comforting rumble of a semi-truck gearing down. Civilization. Escape. I sprinted toward it, branches whipping at my face. "Hey, over here!" I screamed, my voice raw. I burst through the final line of trees, my feet ready to hit the solid asphalt of the shoulder. Instead, they hit soft, yielding mud. The headlights I'd seen flickered and dissolved into a swarm of fireflies. The rumble of the truck faded into the sighing of the wind through the pines. The highway had vanished. It was an illusion, a phantom limb of the world I had lost. I stood there, gasping for breath, ankle deep in mud. The trees had closed in behind me, swallowing the path. I was lost. Utterly, hopelessly lost, in a maze that was actively redesigning itself to break my mind. The forest wasn't just trying to kill me, it was playing with its food. My spirit broke. The rage that had propelled me from the station evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hollow despair. I was a rat in a maze designed by a god, and I was exhausted. The forest had won. I sank to my knees in the cold mud, my flashlight beam cutting a weak, trembling circle on the ground. The whispers returned, a cacophony of phantom voices swirling in the oppressive darkness around me. They were closer now, more distinct. I heard snippets of my own panicked breathing, Ilara's glitched-out pleasantries, the digital scream of the not deer. It was a highlight reel of my own personal hell. I was done. I let the flashlight fall from my numb fingers, its beam pointing uselessly at the sky. I closed my eyes, waiting for whatever came next. Let it take me. Let it end. It was a sound that saved me. Not a whisper or a hallucination, but a real, physical noise. The roar of a straining engine and the violent crack of splintering wood. Two beams of light blasted through the trees, chaotic and wild. Silas's truck. He was crashing through the forest itself, forging his own path through the undergrowth. The truck skidded to a halt 20 feet away, its headlights pinning me in their glare. The driver's door flew open. "Leo, get down! Get on the ground, now!" Silas's voice was a raw, terrified scream, a sound I never thought the stoic old man was capable of making. His panic was so absolute, so primal, that it bypassed thought. I dropped flat, my face pressed into the cold, damp earth. The truck's engine was a desperate roar, but beneath it I heard a new sound. It was the reason for Silas's terror. It was a low, constant chattering. A wet, clicking sound like 1,000 tongues clacking against 1,000 sets of teeth. It wasn't one voice, but a chorus. A dense, overlapping babble of countless voices, all speaking at once. They were distorted, stripped of meaning, their words jumbled into a horrifying auditory soup. I heard men, women, and what might have been children, all babbling nonsensical phrases, fragments of old conversations, and choked, terrified sobs. It was the sound of a crowded room where every single person was screaming into a broken microphone at the same time. Slowly, I lifted my head. I had to see what was making that sound. It was emerging from the trees at the edge of the clearing, moving with a horrifying, deliberate slowness. It was massive, a hulking silhouette against the darkness, a nightmare that defied easy description. I saw limbs, far too many of them, some thick and trunk-like, others spindly and sharp, all moving with an unnerving, independent motion. It wasn't walking, it was flowing, pouring itself through the trees like a thick, dark fluid. The terror of it wasn't in its shape, which my mind refused to properly assemble, but in that ceaseless, chattering sound that emanated from its entire being. It was the collector, the thing the not deer had reported to, the real threat. "Leo, the truck!" Silas shrieked, his voice cracking. The command finally broke my paralysis. I scrambled up, my legs clumsy and weak, and dove for the open passenger door of the truck. I threw myself inside, landing in a heap on the floorboards as Silas slammed the vehicle into reverse. He didn't bother turning around. He simply stomped on the accelerator, and we shot backward, crashing through the forest, the back of the truck taking the brunt of the impacts as trees and branches were annihilated in our wake. I pulled myself onto the seat, my heart feeling like it was trying to beat its way out of my chest. I risked one last look back through the spider-webbed rear window. The collector hadn't pursued. It stood at the edge of the clearing where I had just been, a great, multi-limbed horror bathed in our retreating taillights. It wasn't enraged. It wasn't frustrated. It simply tilted what I assumed was its head, a slow, inquisitive gesture, like a biologist observing a peculiar specimen that had momentarily escaped its petri dish. And as it tilted its head, a new voice joined the horrifying chorus of its chatter. It cut through the babble, clear and distinct, a single, perfect whisper that sounded like it was right beside my ear. "Thank you, Leo." It was Ilara's voice. Pure and clean this time. It wasn't a memory. It was a broadcast. A new acquisition being added to the archive. We burst back onto the trail and Silas wrenched the wheel, sending us fishtailing toward the station. "What was that thing?" I gasped, the words tearing from my throat. Silas's face was a pale, sweat-slicked mask in the dashboard lights. "That," he said, his voice trembling, "is what this forest is really about. We call it the archivist. The collector. It doesn't hunt to kill. That would be a mercy." He glanced at me, his eyes hollow. "It archives things. It collects them. It herds its marked prey into a place that isn't here, a pocket outside of normal space and time. And it just keeps them. The horror isn't dying, Leo. It's eternal, conscious imprisonment. Your voice, just another piece of static in its collection for the rest of eternity." We didn't speak as the truck rattled the last few yards to the station. The silence inside the cab was a thick, shared shroud. When Silas cut the engine, the sudden quiet was a relief, a brief ceasefire in a war. One hadn't known I was fighting. We stumbled inside, the familiar clutter of the office looking alien and fragile, like a museum exhibit of a world that no longer existed. My body trembled, a deep, cellular tremor I couldn't control. I collapsed into a chair, my gaze fixed on the unassuming topographical map on the desk, its neat lines and symbols a lie. Silas didn't offer coffee this time. He moved with a grim, weary purpose, unlocking a heavy footlocker tucked away in a corner. He pulled out not a standard-issue government log, but a thick, leather-bound ledger, its cover worn smooth and its spine reinforced with heavy stitching. He placed it on the desk between us with a soft, definitive thud. "This is the real logbook," he said, his voice low and steady. He opened it. The pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with decades of handwritten entries. The script changed every few years, a testament to the Rangers who had come and gone, but the content was a consistent catalog of horrors. There were frantic, spidery sketches of things that shouldn't exist, detailed notes on auditory phenomena, and underlined, desperate warnings. "The rules aren't just superstition, Leo," Silas said, his finger tracing a faded entry from 1978. "They're countermeasures. They're defenses we've built, one dead ranger at a time." He flipped forward a few pages. "Here, first report of a mimic trying to use a child's voice. That was new. We added a subclause to rule number 3. Here," he pointed to another entry, "is the first time one of them used a name to create a personal hallucination, a dead wife in this case. That's when rule number 4 became inviolable." His eyes met mine, and I saw the grim truth in their depths. "It's a constant, desperate arms race, Leo. They learn, they adapt their tactics. They watch us, and they figure out what we fear, what we trust, what makes us break our own rules. Our protocols are the only thing that gives us a fighting chance." His gaze drifted to the porch. He rose, grabbed a pair of thick canvas gloves, and a heavy-duty evidence bag from a supply closet. He walked outside and, with the detached precision of a bomb disposal expert, used a set of wooden tongs to pick up the 2 pristine shoes from the pile of debris. He sealed them in the bag, then swept the leaves, twigs, and moss into a separate container. He didn't speak as he locked them away in the footlocker, an action so practiced it was clearly a ritual. He turned back to me, his face etched with a profound exhaustion that went far beyond a single night's terror. He delivered the final chilling blow to my shattered psyche, his voice barely a whisper. "Tell me again what you saw tonight, Leo. Tell me about the not deer. Tell me about the collector." I started to speak, but he held up a hand. "Are you sure that's what you saw?" he asked quietly. "Are you absolutely certain? Or is that just what it wants you to remember?" The question landed with the force of a physical blow, knocking the last of the air from my lungs. The phantom highway, the whispers in my own voice. The forest had already proven it could manipulate what I saw and heard in the moment. The idea that it could also reach back and edit the memory itself, corrupting the very record of my own experience, was a violation so profound it dwarfed everything else. How could you fight an enemy that could rewrite your history, that could make you doubt the evidence of your own mind? The deepest fear wasn't being hunted or imprisoned. It was the terrifying possibility that you could no longer trust yourself. My arrogance, my confidence, my entire professional identity, it all crumbled to dust. I was nothing, a child lost in a dark, incomprehensible wood. "Teach me," I pleaded, the words raw and broken. "Silas, please, I don't know anything." "You have to teach me." He looked at me, his gaze softening with a flicker of something that might have been pity. He nodded slowly. "You're part of it now. Leaving you ignorant is just leaving you dead. The first lesson is this. Survival out here isn't about strength or courage. It's about faith. Faith in protocols designed by people who died finding out they were necessary. You don't fight it, you endure it." The night was not over. The patrol still had to be completed, but everything had changed. As I stood up, my legs still unsteady, I was no longer the confident ranger who had arrived just hours before. I was a novice acolyte, humbled and shattered, taking my first step into a much larger, darker world. Silas grabbed his jacket. "Come on," he said, his voice back to its usual gravelly tone. "The sun will be up in a few hours. We have a route to finish." I followed him out into the cold night air, the station's light, a lonely beacon at our backs. I looked at the dark, silent wall of trees, no longer seeing a forest, but the skin of a vast, intelligent predator. The hunt wasn't over. My education had just begun.